It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Sally Jewell's history with the Greenway stretches all the way back to its origins when our founder, Jim Ellis, was recruiting board members from Seattle's growing business community. Jim may not have known that this youngster on his board would soon become CEO of REI, or that a few years after that, she would be chosen by President Obama to serve as our nation's Secretary of the Interior. But he must have seen something special in Sally because he chose her to be his successor as president of the Greenway board when he stepped down from that role after 10 years. Since those early days, Sally has been and remains a friend, advisor, and inspiration to many of us at the Greenway. As Secretary of the Interior, her work on national monuments, her Every Kid in the Park program, and other initiatives have left a tremendous positive mark on a national scale. And now we're happy that she's back home in our community, working with the University of Washington and with her vast network of partners to promote the full value of time spent outdoors. Please join me in welcoming one of our hometown heroes and a forever friend of the Greenway, Sally Jewell.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for that kind introduction. Thank you, Jim, for coming today. I can't tell you how much it means to me to have Jim Ellis in this room, so thank you. And I think his brother John I see over there too. So I know John did acknowledgments, but I have to say that the Greenway Trust has had incredible small but mighty staff over its history of 28 years. We have with us, obviously, John. We have the Greenway staff members that acknowledge. We also have Nancy Keith, who I think was maybe the first paid staff member of the Greenway, or very close to it. But could you just join me in a round of applause for all the Greenway staff, past and present? I only left the Greenway Trust board in 2013 because when you go into government service, you're required to resign from everything. And you actually can't talk to your friends in these organizations for 2 years. At least that was the ethics that we lived under during that time. But I want to say that the room is filled with current and former board members, and what an incredible group of people you all are. And the support that you've provided, the volunteers in this room for the Greenway have made a huge difference. So thank you, board and volunteers of the Greenway as well. And I also want to acknowledge a group of people that rarely get acknowledged and usually are on the other end of receiving criticism, and that is the public servants, the people that work on our public lands, our state parks, our Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, and so many other agencies at a local, at a state, and at a federal level that serve us every single day and yet don't get the appreciation or the budget that they deserve. So if you're a public servant, could you just raise your hand? Thank you for clapping for them. It's great to have the head of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, Jamie Kingsbury, with us here as well. So there is no better classroom that I had to prepare me for being Secretary of the Interior than serving as a volunteer on the Mountains to Sound Greenway board. Nothing. My roots in this area go back to when I immigrated here as almost 4-year-old in 1959. And our old green station wagon, Dinah, would break down regularly on the old Sunset Highway. I remember that. I started skiing when I was 9 years old, and in the Renton Center parking lot, jumped on the ski bus to the Fiorini Ski School. We always put on our double-layer leather ski boots at North Bend. That was the trigger to start getting ready. We walked along the dozens and dozens of buses spewing diesel all day long with the very high berms of snow, probably 10 plus feet tall in those days, to stand in a line on the slopes of Snoqualmie Pass, usually in the rain, learning how to ski. In the late 60s, our family used to sail a lot, and we'd drive across the pass to the incredible reservoirs built up behind the dams. We would go tour the dams. We'd visit places like Potholes Reservoir in our little sailboats, camped all along the way. And then in the late 60s and early 70s, I took the Mountaineers Basic Course, and the peaks that I climbed were things like Chair Peak and McClellan Butte, all now what we know as part of the Mountains to Sound Greenway. I also remember vividly as a small child these strange ways that the landscape was like cut down, these giant white patches with straight lines, and these sort of beautiful forests next to otherwise cut down landscapes. And I thought that's, it was confusing to me. I had no awareness of the history of our region, which we now are recognizing and celebrating with the National Heritage Area designation. That trade and transportation across Snoqualmie Pass happened long before European settlers began to reshape this region. Snoqualmie Pass and I-90, of course, were known to the first people in this area that crossed and traded between the inland tribes in the east and the coastal tribes in the west. And I learned from Morris Jenkins, a member of the Greenway board from the early days from Cle Elum, that a portion of that original trail of the settlers was still there, visible, not yet ground down for agriculture or development or otherwise, just outside of Cle Elum. I learned through the Greenway that the clear cuts in those sections were part of the checkerboard of the American West, the incentives to bring railroads out here by giving them every other section, not realizing, of course, that fragmented habitat. As the timber companies acquired those parcels from the railroads, or the railroads developed them themselves, we ended up with real challenges to our landscape that have been both devastating to habitat and expensive for the timber companies that manage them. So that economic pipeline that began in the tribal days continues to the present day, with the trucks we see going across, with agricultural products, with timber, with mining, with shipping, with recreation, with tourism, and so much more. So the Greenway was a concept really promoted by the Issaquah Alps Trails Club. How many Issaquah Alps Trails Club people out there? Yeah. So a couple early board members from that organization, the late Jack Horning and Harvey Manning, pulled together a group of their friends, including Ted and Gretchen Thompson, amazing supporters of this organization. Thompson family is out here too. And they brought recognition of the fact that, hey, if we don't pay attention, these landscapes are going to get nibbled away. This is 1990. It didn't seem like it's that long ago. And we didn't want I-90 to be like I-70 out of Denver. We didn't want the Greenway Corridor, what became known as the Greenway Corridor, to feel like Orange County. And an early book published on the Greenway had a picture of what happened to Orange County when you don't think about how you shape your future. So the Trust for Public Land took notice. They are the organization that really helped catalyze the Greenway, and they did the smartest thing I think anybody could have done, and that is to recruit Jim Ellis to chair the board of the Greenway. Jim is, let's just say, well into his 9th decade. He served in World War II. He lost his brother Bob there. His wife, Mary Lou, heard his anger and his desire to get revenge and said, instead of doing that, why don't you make your life count for your brothers? First little project Jim took on after graduating from law school at the University of Washington in 1948 was to tackle a massive environmental challenge. All of the communities that we probably now live in were dumping their raw sewage into Lake Washington. So Jim is in many ways known as the father of Metro. This young lawyer brought us cooperation. Cooperation from towns and cities, from throughout this area to say, we have a responsibility to our environment. Talk about being ahead of your time. So for those of you who think that you're winding down your career, you got gray hair, you're gonna go chill out someplace, Jim was 68 when the Greenway was created. I was in my early 30s, and I only got lucky to be asked to serve on the Greenway board because, like so many of the titans of industry in our area said to Jim, I'll support this project, but I don't have time to serve on the board. And John Mangles at Rainier Bank, where I was working at the time, said, well, not me, but maybe this young whippersnapper in her early 30s would be good. I think she kind of likes the outdoors. It was the Greenway, actually, that introduced me professionally to REI, first as a board meeting and then as an employee. And it is a Greenway that has shaped so much of my understanding of how you really get things done, and that's learning at the knee of Jim Ellis. So could we just give him another round of applause? Thank you. So I have to say that I'm 5 years younger today than I was when Jim Ellis started the Greenway. So don't even think about like goofing off. It's not gonna happen. So the board was formed in 1991 when I joined, and it was magical. Community activists sitting down next to business people, ranchers, environmentalists, people with wealth, people with modest means, people who were known within their communities, and people with national recognition. Elected officials, all getting together for dinner in Preston, Washington, where the Greenway continues to meet. They built relationships, they built trust. They had a technical advisory committee led by a man named Bob Rose, who used to work for the Department of Natural Resources, the staff of Brian Boyle, way back when. And that technical advisory committee shaped what we now appreciate are the so many assets in many facets of the Greenway, shaped by a common understanding of the facts. There were a lot of big events that happened in the Greenway. The first land purchase. I want you to picture yourself driving along I-90 at North Bend, and you look to your south, and there is a green hillside with trees that are growing back. That was slated to be a giant housing development. It was the first Greenways acquisition with the support of the Trust for Public Land, the Department of Natural Resources, and a gift from Patsy Collins, the late Patsy Collins, who was an early supporter of the Greenway. Picture those checkerboards I was talking about from my childhood that are not completely, but partially now connected landscapes. Land trades like facilitated by Charlie Raines at the Sierra Club and people at Forterra and other organizations worked for years to say, let's trade. Let's give the Forest Service connected landscapes here. Let's give private companies connected landscapes there. Let's do it in a way where everybody can manage the land much better than you can with the checkerboard pattern. The Iron Horse Trail, incredible backbone of a trail system, which was part of the original Greenway vision, 100 miles from the Sound across to Ellensburg. But that had a few little gaps, like railroad trestles that had fallen down. The Greenway repaired those, and a little problem with a 2-mile-long tunnel, now open, so that you can ride through that tunnel. And if you do with the children in your life, I suggest halfway along you turn off the headlamps. It's amazing. It's amazing. Rod straight, 2 miles long, with just a pinprick of light at both edges. And more recently, I-90. The straightening of I-90 around Snoqualmie Pass, the introduction of wildlife bridges and that are over the trail, and tunnels that are under the trail, are actually spans that prevent cars from being caught up in avalanches, that keep the road open longer, but yes, by the way, help wildlife have a way to cross as well. And what you'll hear about a little later, the middle fork of the Snoqualmie River, transferred from dumping ground to spectacular respite and gateway to wilderness. Mark Boyer is going to tell you about that in a little while. So, as John alluded to, these are decisions made not by chance. These are decisions made by choice from an enlightened area with an incredible number of people that have, for decades now, sat down, built relationships with each other, and built trust. So one of the reasons John gave you time to chat was because that's what this is all about. It's what our country, frankly, needs to get back to. So as I think about the lessons learned from the Greenway and the lessons that helped me do my job better as Secretary of the Interior, it's about the importance of having a diverse coalition of people that bring different perspectives, people that are different from us in every dimension. It's about listening to them, respecting their points of view, sharing an understanding of sound science and facts. Wouldn't that be nice to get back to? To get to know each other personally. So there's no question that there was no experience more profound in helping me do my job in Washington, D.C., which was all about conflicting points of view all the time, within my staff, outside my staff, within different parts of the country, needing to balance the complexities of economic development and history and inertia with where we need to go for the future, recognizing the impact we have on this planet. So what do we have? Over the 28 years of the Greenway's existence, we have more connected landscapes than we had before. We have landscapes that we know and appreciate and understand, and therefore can make the smart decisions about. We've begun to reverse some of the decisions that I saw and witnessed in my childhood. We've got more protected open space. We've also got thoughtful development. There's been a lot of development along the Greenway. You just don't see it. And it's more clustered, and it can be served by services like Metro that would be difficult if it was everybody's little 5-acre parcel of the wilderness. The wildlife corridors have been recognized and enhanced. And struggling communities that were trying to say, what is my identity going forward, are being revitalized, which is really, really exciting. And because of that, we have an amazing quality of life in this region, an amazing quality of life that, having lived in other parts of the country, we cannot take for granted. And I think that that has been part of our region's growth and our success. I also think whether we're an urban population, as much of this room is, or a rural population, we have a greater understanding, because of places like the Greenway, of the value of nature, of proving to ourselves that economic development and environmental protections must go hand in hand. They are not mutually exclusive. I also want to say that the Greenway's recognition from early on with leaders like Sally Kinch of environmental education connects young people like Zahara Ahmed, who we just heard from, about the opportunities of nature and the natural world. And we do wish it was 250 students that applied that could have done this and not just 10. So perhaps later on you can help make a difference in that and have a few more people. Harvey Manning and Jim Ellis in the early days of the Greenway said, we can have wilderness on the Metro. And you know what? We now do have wilderness on the Metro. Yeah, you can clap for that. I think was it 30,000 riders, John? 10,000? Pardon? 10,000 riders, and a number of them people who never would have gotten out in the first year of that program, which is just fantastic. And like our nation's public lands, so much of the Greenway is in public ownership, and it belongs to everyone. And it has the potential to welcome people from all walks of life. And if we do that, a place like the Greenway will have support, political support. It'll matter to people because they've had an opportunity to experience this. So I would say, as we look to the future of the Greenway, nature is needed now more than ever in our lives. We know we're going to continue to have population growth. People need space to breathe. They need space to connect with nature. We're going to need more clean water. We need to help people understand the value of this environment so it can continue to get better. Our climate is changing. We know that. Lower snowpack. On the radio this morning, I heard about the potential of droughts this summer. More liquid coming, more precipitation coming as rain. Increased fire risk, particularly on the west side of the state. Invasive species like the blackberries that Sahara was removing, and so many of you have gotten out and done. And habitat that's threatened by the species that don't have a vote in our elections. Support for public lands is not enough, particularly at a federal level. You look at the Forest Service budget, which has been pretty steadily shrinking while the need to fight fires grows. I know when I left the Department of the Interior, they had crossed the 50% mark of the U.S. Forest Service budget that was used to fight fires, and that's getting tougher. So support at a state level and a federal level for Department of Natural Resources, parks, and our federal land management agencies is going to be really critical, but there will never be enough money to go around. So how do we make the case for public lands and the places we care about? And we make the case by reaching the voters and having the voters tell their elected officials. But I would say there's also a growing recognition of the value of forest and natural areas for carbon sequestration, for natural water filtration, for water retention, for habitat, for clean air, for biodiversity. There was a study recently done, I think commissioned by the Wilderness Society, but done by a third-party economic firm that values Forest Supervisor Kingsbury's district as worth over $1 trillion in 100 years. And that's not speculation. That's the avoided cost of having to put in infrastructure that we would have to do if we didn't have it. And exposure to nature, especially among young people, will lead to smarter decisions on land and water resources. It's already so much better than it was during my childhood, and it's something that I am reinforced with daily in my work at the University of Washington. I'd also say we have an opportunity within the Greenway to deepen our engagement with tribes. The 4 years that I spent as Secretary of the Interior, the relationships that I developed with tribes across this country has given me a profound and a deep appreciation of the respect for their history, their culture, their connections to these landscapes that we could all learn from. And I'm encouraged by the work that's happened with the Yakima tribe and the Yakima Basin Plan in shaping the future of that region, and the coastal tribes' engagement in helping all of us recognize that our decisions over the past have impacted the salmon, have impacted Puget Sound, and we better get our act together. And we're now on the national radar, as John mentioned, as a national heritage area. That's not easy to do. To get recognition from the National Park Service, recognition from the U.S. Congress, but we have a chance not only to help protect the Greenway in perpetuity and to hopefully raise awareness and support on a public level and a private level for the history and the culture and what's unique to this region, but also we have a chance, as I did personally, to show the Greenway as an example to the rest of the country and perhaps the rest of the world on what we can do when we get people of different points of view around a table, we break bread, and we learn from each other. So what can you do? I probably don't have to tell this crowd this, but experience your Greenway, especially with the young people in your life and those who have never had an opportunity to see what treasures lie just outside our cities and towns. Yes, go with your old hiking buddies, but also take somebody new, somebody that hasn't been introduced, someone from this area that's still trying to find their way into the insular communities of Seattle that are a little hard to break into, especially if you're a person of color. Watch the elk browse in the Snoqualmie Valley. Herds are coming back. Hike the Coal Mines Trail in Cle Elum. Cast your fly into the river. Hike into the Alpine Lakes Wilderness, just now a 40-minute drive away from here. Take your family biking through that tunnel and turn off your headlamps. Visit the historic Thorpe Mill, just outside of Ellensburg. It's an incredible place where flour was milled in the olden days. And get some great fruit from a roadside stand in Kittitas County. Support the local businesses along the way. They need your support. They need you to buy your gas. They need you to buy your groceries. They need you to spend the night. They need you to buy the stuff that they have to sell. And as you drive along I-90, appreciate the wildlife crossings that are now available below you and above you. Feel your blood pressure fall as you cruise eastbound through the Issaquah Gate, flanked by the lush forests of Grand Ridge and Tiger Mountain on both sides. Appreciate the snow-capped peaks that provide our water and the changing character of the forests from east to west. See how fast Mother Nature heals the scars of the past and the landscapes around you. Marvel at the green stripes on the steep slopes that were once old, eroding logging roads, removed by the Greenway and its partners 20 years ago. As I sat by Bill Chapman, third president of the Greenway Trust Board, and looked at one of the pictures, I thought, oh, there's some roads that need to be taken out. And please support the Greenway with your time, your treasure, and your influence. It makes a difference. Volunteer. Bring your family out to build a trail. Pull some Himalayan blackberry. There's nothing more therapeutic, especially if you're having a tough week. Vote. And please let your elected officials know how much you appreciate their support for public lands and how important they are to the health of our economy. And, of course, write a big check or put it on your Alaska Airlines or REI cards and get the benefits of that when Mark Boyer asked you to this morning. And I want to conclude with what I always conclude with in my talks, and that is my favorite proverb. And this guided so much of what I did at Interior. We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Jim created a better future for me, for my children, my grandchildren, his great-grandchildren probably. We all have an opportunity to continue that momentum that Jim started and make it happen for the generations to come. Thank you.